Welcome to the Leading Saints studio. I'm Kurt Francom, and excited to have an enlightening conversation with Rick here, who I'm used to listening to the podcast. Now I'm in it. This will be surreal.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for more on history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In our next conversation with Kurt Francom, we'll talk about whether it's okay to bring up sticky topics at church. What does Kurt Francom think about this? I know we had a conversation over lunch a month or two ago, and one of the things that really stuck out to me from our conversation that I really appreciated is it feels like you are a very welcoming person, and I had made a comment about I can't speak up in church. I'm going to cause too many waves. You know, I'd listened to Terrell Givens say, when you may not have the same beliefs, speak up. But in my experience, it's always been bad. It's bad if you speak up.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you're doing with your podcast to improve the culture? Because I remember you said it shouldn't be that way.
Absolutely not, right? Yeah.
And so what are some things that we can do, with your podcast or just as church members to make it more comfortable for people to speak up?
This is a issue and a problem that I've wrestled with and tried to figure out, because obviously I have a platform, I have an audience, I sort of take it upon myself at times to think, okay, what can we bring to the discussion that will help people better understand this issue? And I think we've done that in other arenas, working with organizations like North Star with LGBT topics, bringing more dialogue to leaders of that, doubt and faith crises and things like that. But this is definitely a cultural monster that is ever present that we just can't seem to crack. And not I don't sit here today acting like I have the answer, but maybe I can articulate, because usually the thing is not necessarily having the answer, but a lot of leaders and maybe more orthodox members of the church don't even see the problem. And so they don't realize they're alienating people, even though they are, right? And so
I think some of them do know they're alienating people and think it's worth the cost.
Like the wheat and the tares type thing, right?
Well, I mean, I will just say, I don't know if this is going to get me in trouble. We might edit this out.
Okay.
We'll see. But, I moved into this new ward. I thought, this is a new start. I'm going to speak up in Sunday school and in priesthood meeting. And I remember this one guy that he would just shut me down every single time. Mm-hmm. And I was probably in the ward, I would say, less than a year. Mm-hmm. And guess who became the new bishop? Mm-hmm. And I just thought, wow, I've got to keep my head low in here. Mm-hmm. He's the hammer, I'm the nail. I'm going to get nailed here. And so I've made a very conscious decision. And I think, to be honest, he has appreciated that. Uh-huh. That I pick my spots. I hardly ever speak up in church. I don't feel comfortable speaking up in church. I will say this. I was asked to speak in church, which was actually a surprise to me. I didn't think I would ever speak in the word. In fact, I was just thinking, he's never going to ask me to speak in this word. And then his counselor did, and it was on family history, which was my calling, which is great. And they wanted me to give this talk from Elder Bednar, I remember. And Elder Bednar is not my favorite speaker.
He's my favorite speaker. So just to create a balance here.
There we go.
To show that we can have a civil conversation.
But I took I took Elder Ballard's talk, and I remember he talked about the spirit of
Bednar's talk, right?
Bednar, yeah. I said the wrong name there. Bednar. And he talked about the spirit of Elijah, and so I took that and gave the talk that said, well, let's talk about the spirit of Elijah. How did that vision come in? I told all these little historical facts. The cool thing was, after I got done, the bishop came up to me and said, wow, I actually learned something from your talk. And I was like, thank you. Because a lot of times I feel like I don't learn anything in church.
Yeah.
And I guess that's not necessarily a thing. But to me, it's energizing to learn. Mm-hmm. And that's why I have my podcast. I feel like, My podcast is the Sunday school class out in the hall. We can talk about stuff that you can't talk about at church. And it is really a release for me to be able to talk about, controversial stuff, or, it might not be testimony building. And it's just so hard for me sometimes to go to church and to sit to another poorly prepared lesson. We don't have a trained theologians to teach, and so it's just really hard for me. I mean, how can you build what are some things that we can do to make it more comfortable for people?
For sure. And I guess let me start here, is that we often, I would say the vast majority of members, if you sat that down and said, how would you rate the quality of teaching in your gospel doctrine class? It would be very poor, right? Very low. But we're all patient and try and encourage them by being there and answering their superficial questions, whatever. And so we may, early on I thought, that's just because we're a lay ministry, they're not experienced in teaching, and they're not very good. Well, I think it's more of a question of the culture of not allowing conflict into the room, because we see conflict as if it was synonymous with contention. And I've written a few articles about this, along with some other contributors on Leading Saints, about the important need of conflict in an organization to gain a deeper meaning and understanding of doctrine. But a lot of people see that, and 3rd Nephi comes to their mind and say, no, contention is of the devil. And we say, we did not say contention, we said conflict. If someone came to me and said, my marriage is going great, we never have any conflict, I would say, I think there's something wrong about your marriage that you're not seeing. It is in the conflict that I have with my wife where we gain a deeper love and understanding and a deeper bond together, right? Now, if we were just conflicting, if it was conflict in our marriage, that's not healthy. But just lost my train of thought here. So if it's conflict and contention, right? Thank you. So if there was contention in my marriage, that would be a problem. But we absolutely need conflict, because that helps us grow. And so in the context of our Sunday school classes, we do need more room for conflict. And that can only begin with the bishop or the leadership saying to the Sunday school president, this is okay, or to be the devil's advocate at times and raise your hand and say, well, I know some people see it this way. What do you think about that, right? And it's not about watering down doctrine or promoting false doctrine, because you would be surprised, many people who think they know the doctrine, that's not the doctrine. There's core tenets of the doctrine. I did a great episode with Anthony Sweat about what doctrine is. He's a professor down at BYU, and there is, once you leave the core doctrines, which is, faith, baptism, the Savior, atonement, like outside of that, maybe you don't know the doctrine like you think you know the doctrine. And when you get shut down, you're still in the world of doctrine, but he sees it differently, even though he thinks that you're spouting false doctrine. When in your reality, you're just giving a conflicting perspective, which is okay. And so I don't have the answer to that question of how this is done, but it starts with the leaders to sit down and say, why isn't there more conflict in your lessons? And the reason, and if you don't allow conflict into it, it's going to be a very superficial lesson. We're going to get the same questions of, what is faith? Does anybody have an experience where you prayed and a miracle happened and everybody stares at the carpet, right? Like, the only way we're going to get more dynamic teaching is to allow conflict to come, because we can gain a deeper understanding, which leads to higher level of word unity, because we can then have conversations and understand people. But if we don't, if I was in a ward where that was happening, I guess it would just mean we need to walk in there and say, we want people to share opposing views in this class, and we're not trying to create hurt or contention, but our culture just is so uncomfortable with that. No, get me, like, I'm coming here to validate all the basic doctrines that I know, but it won't work without conflict in a class. And there's so many studies of organizations that if conflict is not present, it fails.
See, well, let me tell you another experience that I had one time. So I was the gospel doctrine teacher, and I I tried to enhance the lesson with stuff that was not in the lesson. I got called into the bishop's office twice. One time was I remember I was teaching Old Testament. We were teaching Isaiah. I don't know about you, but I find Isaiah incomprehensible.
I've been there, yes.
And so I found a non-King James version of the Bible. I remember one time I asked a class member, will you read this this verse in Isaiah? And he read it. And I said, so what does that mean? And he was like, I have no idea. And I says, well, let's read it in this version of the Bible. And it was way more comprehensible. I got called into the bishop's office for using non-King James Version Bible. Apparently, and I didn't know this at the time, but apparently a member of the stake presidency was there. I didn't know him. And he was the one who complained. My bishop told me this later. I just thought it was a ward member at the time. And in this case, he just said, you know what, just don't rock the boat. I don't want to have any conflict. I don't want to have any. I don't. And I was kind of irritated that, holy cow, a Bible is not allowed in an Old Testament class, and that's kind of how I took it. And I think that there are a lot of bishops that are that, I don't want anybody to complain about your lessons, so just teach the generic stuff. I'll tell you another situation where I had this one high priest group leader, and he tried to get into some of the controversial stuff like ordained women and things like that. But he always did it from an orthodox point of view, that ordained women's evil and terrible. I don't think ordained women's evil. I had a couple of people on my podcast that talked about it. We were open about it. I'm definitely more open about it, but I got to the point where I didn't want to go to these lessons anymore because there was too much conflict. There was too much contention. And I actually sat out a couple weeks because I was just like, I'm not doing it. He got replaced with another person who the teachers just gave the most boring, bland lessons, and I actually appreciated it because there wasn't the contention. But on the other hand, I was bored out of my skull, but it was better than fighting.
Yeah, right.
And so, as a ward member like me, I've got no power, none. I just pretty much just have to shut down. Do you have any?
Like what is it?
What do you do?
Everyday ward member who doesn't have any influence, right?
Yeah.
Brene Brown talks about this concept that we must look at everybody that they're trying to that they're doing their very best. And you're talking about a leadership problem, and I will admit, this needs to change, and it's in other wards. The fact that we can't bring conflict to a gospel doctrine class, again, and conflict does have sort of a negative connotation, but just opposing views and opposing different insights, we're going to be in the bland lessons. Now, obviously, the whole structure of the church has changed, and maybe at home, you can thrive with your family as far as bringing out a different translation of the Bible and gaining deeper insight from it, right? But the reality is that it is so difficult to be a leader of a ward or of a stake or anybody and know and realize that people are suffering because of something you're doing, but they never came to you and said, this is really difficult. And so the reality is, if your bishop does listen to this at some point, I hope he knows that I think he's doing the best that he can, and with what he knows and his background, and he's not a bad bishop for letting this perpetuate. He's doing the best he can. And I hope that all leaders out there are open to letting somebody come in and listening to them and not saying, well, if you knew this or that, or, yeah, but you don't understand this, and you just don't understand because I'm the bishop and I see problems differently, and just sit down and be like, wow. I have a member of my ward who comes to Sunday school and doesn't enjoy it because he feels like he can't raise his hand. That's a problem. So what can I gain from sitting down with this individual and saying, what can we do differently? And creating an atmosphere of safety where you could say, you know what, Bishop, before you were a bishop, you sat in a Sunday school, and every time I brought something up, you shut me down. And from the day that you got called as bishop, that's been so hard for me to sustain you or follow you. I generally sustain you, whatever. but it's been really difficult for me. And are you willing to hear me, understand me? And man, to be understood by your bishop, just that moment in sacrament meeting where he came up to you and said, I learned something from you. Like, that did so much for you. And we have Liz Wiseman, who's a fantastic Latter-day Saint scholar, who wrote this book called Multipliers. So many leaders are accidental diminishers, where they, in the best intentions, they're diminishing everybody around them. When in reality, you could be one of the best gospel doctrine teachers there is. If we can all just let loose and realize that Rick isn't trying to poison the well, that he just has some background and understanding of these doctrines that maybe we haven't considered, and what can we gain as a deeper level of faith because of that. And so to me, the greater principle is, as a leader, like, what can you do as a leader or as a everyday member? Set an appointment with a bishop and go in there with a full heart and just saying, like, I don't feel heard in Sunday school. Does that matter to you? Because when we have these lessons and I don't want to be there, I get the impression that it doesn't matter to you. But I'm guessing that's really not how you feel, right? And if you can be as empathetic towards them so they'll be empathetic back, I mean, we've got to have these difficult conversations. Everyday members saying, I don't feel validated when I come to church, and part of me wants to not come some weeks. How do you feel about that? Right? And if we can have those real conversations, we'll get nowhere. And I get it. Like, you may be thinking in your head, like, you don't understand my bishop. Like, there's not a chance in eternity that he's going to willing to have that conversation. Well, if that's the case, sit back. That's why we have a lay ministry that rotates, and find 2 or 3 or 4 people in the ward that you can connect with and have some of these foyer conversations.
This is why I podcast, because they're not in my ward.
All right. I bet you'd be surprised they're there. And just say, who are 2 people that I can impact for good? Who's struggling out there? Who is further down the path who feels like they can't come to church because they don't feel validated, that I can maybe reach out to? And I can go to the elders quorum president and say, will you put me as their ministering brother? I think I can really connect with this person, right? So it's basically like regrouping, stepping back and saying, okay, I'm not going to single-handedly change my leadership of the ward, but I'm going to be here and I'm going to have influence while I'm here. It breaks my heart when I hear people just say, well, you know, they have a list of complaints about what the leadership doesn't let them do, and so that diminishes their own leadership, and they just sit on the sidelines. But that everybody is a leader and not a calling. I mean, that's why we preach that, is that there is something you can do in your ward to bring you purpose and validation there. And you may just have to grit your teeth through gospel doctrine until somebody will hear you. But you've got to set those appointments and give them a chance, because he may not even know it. And that's what breaks my heart, is there's so many leaders out there who are never given a chance because a member's not strong enough or courageous enough to just walk in there and say, your culture that you've created really hurts me. Let's talk about it. Probably not the answer you want, right? But
No, that's great. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Kurt Francom. In our next conversation, we'll talk about a study done to find out why people become disaffected. Is church history part of that?
Yes, the percentage who strongly agree about the contribution of issues in individuals' faith crisis in regards to questions about church history, and then it went the other way, right? A lot of faith crisis members, that was a biggie, almost more than 85%. Gender roles within the church, that was another biggie for
so
faith
you
crisis.
Said, how about the leaders? Did the leaders think church history was a problem?
The leaders were around 40%, but it wasn't the 80%, right? There's still a
40
discrepancy.
And 80, it's a big difference.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that short clip from our next interview. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please go to our patreon.com/gospeltangents and subscribe for just $5 a month. If you'd like a transcript of this, please click the yellow subscribe button at gospeltangents.com, and I'll send you this and all future transcripts. Also, if you'd like a paperback like we've got here, those are available at our website at amazon.com. Just do a search for Gospel Tangents. Please get all updates at our Facebook page at facebook.com/gospeltangents. We're also on Twitter at Gospel Tangents. You can also get transcripts individually at our website, gospeltangents.com/shop. Finally, make sure that you subscribe on our Apple Podcast page. Just do a quick search for Gospel Tangents there. and give us a 5-star review while you're at it. Thanks again for listening. Your support helps create more Mormon history classes and podcasts such as this, and so I really appreciate you listening. Please share with your friends. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some more of our great videos. Thanks again.